What's up, guys? Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Nick.
How you doing?
I'm good. We record, I feel like 3 times a week now, so I see you guys all the time.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's
It's
good.
fun as hell. It's some of the best times of the week.
Yeah, it's good.
But,
I'm excited about this episode. I'm calling it Not My Problem because it's about managing orders. I just bring in the orders, throw it over the fence, and somebody else figures it out.
That is entirely 100% the opposite advice we're going to give today, Nick. That's terrible advice. Our mission is to equip and inspire, not to dump and run. So,
All right. Hey, a simple wrong could have been fine. You didn't have to elaborate on how wrong I was.
the most wrong ever. No, it is, that we're talking about managing production today.
Yeah.
Part of the MBA series. This is a big one.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. At the end of the day, we are making chips, and we're going to actually talk about that. Everything's been set up to making chips, and now we're going to talk about what happens when you get the jobs and you got to start cutting chips.
That's true, although admittedly, most of the conversation will be about the things you have to do to make, before you actually are cutting the chips. But we will talk about the chip cutting process somewhat. Awesome. Maybe in part 2. This will probably be a 2-parter because I think we're going to get kind of deep.
Awesome.
So what do you think, Mike?
Let's go.
I think Mike's going to just wait till we're all clear on that and then go tell Hill to start working.
Right. Right.
All right, you guys can start now. We got there. So let's jump in. We almost missed the music, Mike. You got to start your day with music.
Absolutely.
Then we can let Paul teach his class here because he's going to be leading.
Well, Paul is the
this
guru
is
at
definitely
this.
This is definitely a conversation, not just a lesson. But it's I started learning most of what we're going to talk about today by doing it wrong myself in my own shop, right, many years ago. And I think like many shop owners, I started my shop pretty young, and definitely was just dumb and naive and didn't really know much of anything. But a lot of shop owners are experts in their craft, right? They're technicians that are master tool makers or machinists or programmers or something. And they're like, hey, if I'm good at that, I'm going to be good at running a business that does that thing. Mm-hmm. And, as we've talked before, there's a few other things could be further from the truth. And that's okay because it's a different skill set. You're not really taught those things. But today we're going to touch on some of the things that really are important to get in place to have an effective manufacturing operation.
Would you say that was you, Paul, the guy who's like, hey, I'm great at machining and thinking that way, so I'll be great at running a business? Or did you kind of go into it knowing I have a lot to learn and I might not be great at running a machine shop as much as I am at running a machine?
Well, I was not great at running machines either. I had taken some classes. I had made maybe about 20 different part numbers, maybe 30 different part numbers for the Formula SAE cars that we were building in college. But besides that's all I knew.
Got it. You were always more in like a sales type function, even for Pro CNC, or am I getting that wrong?
At the beginning, we all wore every hat. So I definitely was programming and machining and setting up jobs and designing fixtures. But then, after a year or so, kind of fell more into the business development guy.
They were like, all right, we got to get Paul off the machine.
Yeah, he's so bad at this.
How do we tell him nicely that he's got other strengths?
Right.
Yeah, I think it was like, whoever wants to go do sales or don't do sales, take the step backwards. And I wasn't paying attention. And so I was the last one. I'm like, where did everyone go? Like, everyone's behind me.
That's how my uncles talk about my dad. They were like, Dietmar was so bad on the machines, we wouldn't let him do it. Just go run the company. Get out of here.
But what I learned is that once you sell a job, you can't just throw it over the wall. Like, here, guys, good luck with this job. Here's the due date. Like, that is setting everyone up for failure, including your customer. And then they won't come back again.
Absolutely.
So it's important to get it right. Yeah, let's dig in. So first of all, I think, I guess I just sort of said right up front there, if you don't execute on it, it's going to be just extremely challenging to keep going and finding new customers all the time because you're disappointing the ones that you already got.
Yes.
Right? The easiest customers to do work for are the ones you already have. And it's important to, execute and deliver consistently, day in, day out, week in, week out. Yeah, because reinventing the wheel every time with, finding new customers, you pissed off the old ones.
Yeah,
It's not a great place to start.
Getting this process nailed down for you. And it's, it's going to be a little bit individualized for every shop. But I mean, it's critically important, I think, to growth. I mean, I know like when I bought Hill, I did not like our process. We had a process. It was not great. I mean, it wasn't very detailed and it wasn't followed real well. And I think I've talked before about, I spent almost 2 years owning the shop before I would even talk to a potential customer. We worked this entire process out first, got where we were comfortable with it, that then we could go talk to other people and not feel like we were going to fall on our face.
Mm-hmm. I heard Keith on, I think, the Titans of CNC podcast. He was talking about the late, great Bill Selway, who told him early in his sales career, like your customers, he would sell machine tools, right? He said, your customers that just focus on high quality and on-time delivery will never run out of work. Like to your point, Paul, the ones that are kind of like chasing down orders they're probably not ready to take. They don't really have a process figured out. They end up inevitably disappointing a customer. The customer never comes back. Then they got to go chase the next one. And it's like, the advice you give to your sons, like, make sure you got your stuff together before you go get into a relationship with some girl, because you'll just be creating a lot of baggage, and that's what happens. And you see it all the time.
Well, I think a lot of companies are probably guilty of not actually having a documented process that they follow. They're just like, hey, we got the job. Now we just got to get it done. Let's do it.
That's the way we were.
Yep. We got to order some material, got to get some tools, got to program it, got to figure out our work holding. And let's just go ahead, just barrel ahead.
It kind of goes back to the tech stack episode where it's like, we advised to have an ERP system, even if you're a one-man shop, like the one-person shop. You just need to start with a system, because especially with like Pro Shop, it forces you to have a process. Once you have a system, now you have to have a process. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a process prior to having a system, but like systems don't work with the wing it method. So
yeah. Any system you have, whether it's built on Excel or Google Sheets or ProShop or another ERP, it should be an operating system and exactly how you're going to run things. Because if you don't have a standardized process, things are just invariably going to go off the rails. They're going to go off the rails enough as it is, even when you have one, because the machine shop world is the hardest business and there's always things coming out of left field. But having a defined process enables you to respond to those things much better, build a level of consistency that you're going to do the right things and not forget things, do it at the right time, and that just makes everything much easier. So the first thing that I think is crucially important is the importance of having a detailed plan for the job, right? When you estimate a job, I think we talked about it probably a little bit in the estimating episode. It's important to have not just a price, that you gave your customer, but an actual, preliminary process for how you're going to make these parts, right? It's going to go on this machine first and then that machine, and we're going to start on this face and then flip it over or do whatever, right? And so having something that's reasonably fleshed out that has accurate times associated with it, that's super critical, right? If it's just like, throw it on the mill and then it goes to the lathe afterwards, that's just not enough level of detail to make sure that that's going to go smoothly. And like when it needs to be on the mill, when it needs to be on the lathe, when it needs to be off the lathe to go to anodizing or to whatever, and to come back and inspect it and then finally make it to your customer on time, right? Because most customers these days are very lead time sensitive in most industries. And sometimes that's the most important thing to them. So if you're not setting yourself up to be successful on lead time, very other few things matter. And I think a lot of times what shops are guilty of is they'll just throw resources at a job to make sure it comes in on time at the expense of other jobs or at the expense of their own sanity. Yes. And it just gets super overwhelming. And
it's a never ending cycle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we were in, again, when I bought Hill, we were just in this constant, matter of fact, I remember, we would call them hot jobs. So if it was something that was late, it was, anything like that. And, one of my kind of expediter guys, he had the idea to order some little hot stickers off of Amazon, like that you would see on a food item or something. So we're like, okay, put those on all the jobs that are hot.
It's every single job.
So when you walk around the shop, every job had a hot sticker on it because we were just in this constant churn where we'd throw all our resources and all our machines at getting this job done. Meanwhile, there was 15 other jobs waiting on those same resources.
Oh, we have the same story. We have she's retired now, and she was brilliant. We loved her. She was so good. But we had this inside salesperson who had the same thing. You could put in the subject line hot. And so like all of her quotes started with that because she was smart. Like, I'll get them back faster. And then we realized,
Right.
like, Susan, they're like every quote is hot. She's like, I just want them back.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. So that is not sustainable. And that is a quick road to burnout, not only of the owner, but of the whole team. And if you burn out your team, that's a bad spot to be in because they're not going to be able to keep that up.
I think this one, while you were speaking, something we talk about a lot in our business is the difference between like process planning and like value stream mapping.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have like other episodes on lean and stuff, but I think it's important to know like how to do those things. Like some shops, lots of shops, too many shops have like no idea how to do either of those things very well. But, process planning is going to be like maximizing the workflows of individual processes. And then value stream mapping is really going to be thinking about the entire flow of value end to end all the way to your customer. And going through those exercises is just like super, super valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. We should have an entire episode on lean and continuous improvement because I'm not sure that's actually in the list, is it?
Oh, it is now. We just added
it. It is now.
That's the beauty of running this thing with you guys. We can, we're the professors of the class. We can change the syllabus.
Yeah, that's good. So back to planning. What the output of planning, I think, should be is every step that you're going to have to put those parts through, whether it's a manufacturing step, a quality step, assembly, creating the paperwork, whatever it might be, and then the times associated with those steps. Right? How much it is to set it up and how much it is to process and run each piece. If you don't have that, again, it's so hard to make sure it all comes together on time and know your internal deadlines of when you need to have certain things done by. So that's a really important thing. The next thing I think is identifying the longest lead time items and kicking off parallel processes at the very beginning, right? We've all heard the story of like an order gets in, you win an order from your customer, somebody prints that out, literally prints it on a piece of paper, and then it like goes to the salesperson to like confirm it, and then it goes to scheduling or it goes to purchasing or whatever, and it like moves around with different people to sign off on it even before you confirm it. And sometimes that then drags out to be days, and your customer doesn't want to wait days to have you confirm their order. So I think it's crucial to parallel process and kick off multiple work streams all at the same time. Make sure that, if you have identified that you have a long lead time custom grind tool or the material or whatever it might be, that get immediately, put in queue to purchase. Because again, if you don't have, you go to set up your job and your custom ground cutter isn't there, you're not cutting chips that day, right? And
you got to find the Herbie. I don't know if anyone knows that reference, but but the book, The Goal. Yeah. It's like, what's the Herbie in this process? And for those that don't know the book, there's, they bring all these real life examples to the protagonist of The Goal's life, and I think it was like a Boy Scout camp where they all had to make it through, and there was this one slow kid named Herbie, and it's like, doesn't matter how fast the other processes are or the other people are, like, we got to get Herbie through the finish line. So let's identify the Herbie and figure out basically where the bottleneck is.
Yeah. So Mike, when you didn't have as much of a process, what were the things that would trip you guys up?
Oh gosh, material was always a big one. And at the time we actually did a lot of customer supplied material. And one particular customer, they weren't actually always good about sending the material. They would send material on a regular basis, but without the visibility into the process, we didn't know if the material was here necessarily. So we knew we needed to get this job started. We get the machine all set up or close to set up, gathering tools and whatnot. And then we'd go look for the material and it wasn't here. So just even that simple, I think the whole planning phase is probably the biggest ROI we've seen in developing a process. I mean, just everything we're talking about, making sure we've got the tools, making sure we've got everything lined out, ready to go.
Quality plan.
And I would even say, fast forward now, 6, 7 years, whatever it's been, 9 times out of 10, when something goes wrong today, it probably goes back to we didn't plan properly.
Sure.
Maybe we kind of skipped through the process. It was simple, right? So we just kind of checked off some boxes and moved forward, and then it wasn't so simple anymore.
Yeah. So I'll mention one thing that I've heard more than one time, and that is an owner who says that they don't have time to spend more time up front. It's like, we got this job, we got to get it to production immediately. Right. And or they're unwilling to invest in what they would consider an overhead cost. That's like, that's not a value added person. Like, I need people that can cut chips. Right. I don't want to have another office person, burdening every hour of machine time.
Right.
But I can tell you that just from the anecdotal feedback, and you just reinforce that, Mike, like an hour or a minute spent in an upfront planning will save you at least 10 times out the number of time or resources on the back end.
Absolutely.
Easily. Could be 100 times, right?
Yeah.
If you can avoid those problems before they even happen, make sure the material is here. Make sure your quality plan is solid so you don't realize you've scrapped all your parts because as you flip it from one op to the next, it's not right? Or you don't have that tool and your machine literally sits for a day because you are overnighting, a $25 tool or a $250 tool. But,
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The cost of the tool isn't the point. That's not even the problem.
It's the downtime.
Exactly.
We've
all heard like, you don't have time to do it right, but you have time to do it again.
Yeah.
So for sure.
Well, it's, it goes back to our entire tagline, right? If you're not making chips, you're not making money. And if you don't plan your job out correctly, there's going to be a period in time that you're not making chips.
Yeah. Or you could be making chips and making no money.
Right.
Like making wrong parts.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't just impact that one job that's gone sideways. It's impacted everything that's after it. Right.
Yep.
So it just is this cascade of problems. Which stresses people out, which causes expedite fees, which, overtime.
Throw overtime at it.
It's just a bad situation.
I like that you said stresses people out too, because we don't often think about like kind leadership in having a nice process, having an organized process. But it's actually it's unkind to your people to live in chaos because everyone's stressed all the time and you're at work more than you're at home. So now your life sucks.
Yeah. I talk internally all the time about, I think this would be a very, very true statement, but 98% of the stress that we have in our business is self-induced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's through the lack of following our own process.
Yeah. I always say all of our problems can be boiled down to either we don't have a process or we have a process that we're not following or the process or the standard that we set up doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of those three things every time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you need to always bring it back to process, not throwing any particular person under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you said that about kind leadership because I know our listeners care about their employees. And if they're not putting in a good process, that's unkind.
Yeah.
Right? Because it does cause stress. It does cause a lot of heartache. So, and I've heard companies that realize how much better it does get and how much less stress and people are less on edge and they're kinder to each other when they do have a process that they're following.
I was talking to my wife about there's a certain way I want the laundry done. And I told her it's unkind when you don't do it that way. And so now I live in my car.
Dude, yeah, I was going to say.
Speaking of self-induced stress.
Oh, buddy.
Yeah, now I live in my car. It's got a Kimbo on it, though.
Oh, that's too funny. All right. So we're developing a good plan. We're parallel processing. So we're making sure all those things are happening at the beginning. And I think it's really important to use checklists. One of the books that I read early on in my career was called The Checklist Manifesto. And it was this really good book. The author, I think, is Atul Gawande. And he was a medical researcher, doctor, and he talks about how when they implemented checklists in pre-surgery, the incidences of death from making a mistake in the surgery went down like 70%.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's just super crazy. And they modeled their checklist after a pilot's pre-flight checklist, right? Everyone knows that pilots go through a pre-flight checklist, and it's super critical because they got 300 people relying on them to get there on safely. But at least years ago, doctors didn't have a similar thing. And, brain surgery or whatever kind of surgery you're going through is a really complicated process. But I would argue that running a machining job is just as complicated as brain surgery, right? There's 1,000 details you got to get right. If they all don't go perfectly, your job's not going to go smoothly. And expecting, a skilled programmer, a machinist to get everything right every time just by remembering every single step without a checklist is setting them up for failure. So we call it a pre-processing checklist, in our system, but it is adopting that is one of the most impactful things that we see people have success with. So,
and we've talked about that before, right, Paul? Where we were running ads for that checklist. I remember, and so it's something people can find and look at, even if they're not a Pro Shop user.
That was our setup reduction guide.
Okay, got it.
But that checklist is certainly is on that list. Making sure that you are pre-kitting all your tools, making sure your material is here, making sure your program is done, making sure your quality plan is done, making sure that you have the right drawing revision, making sure, all these things. And the checklist itself is totally configurable, but the point is you're building that process. You're making sure that people are following it by verifying and signing off that they did each step. Because even the best people, best intentions, forget a step. And those are the steps that bite you in the ass, right? And you were saying, Mike, the most, oftentimes the most jobs that go sideways are because you didn't follow your own process.
Yep.
Someone forgot to check off that box or didn't use the checklist at all.
Yeah. I mean, I literally, we have a whole process flow chart that hopefully everybody knows by heart that kind of walks through this a lot of what we're talking about today. And I mean, I can't even tell you the last time something went sideways that I couldn't point to the 1 or 10 boxes that we skipped, right? I mean, if we had just done that one thing. And I understand sometimes why we skipped it. It seems so simple, right? We've done this 100 times and we just skipped over that one little process, and that's where it bites us in the ass.
Yeah. And so what do you tell someone when things are just super hot, busy, they're just to slow down, do the check, what's the advice to have it resonate that you actually got to do it 100% of the time?
The big thing I always go back to is look, if you don't tell me that you don't have the time, the resources, whatever to do the process, then I assume you're doing it, right? So, so where I would go back is say, as leaders, you got to make sure you're providing them the time and the resources to follow the process. If the process isn't working, then we need to talk about that too, right? Maybe we're skipping part of the process because it's no good anymore. Okay. Well, then now we need to fine tune the process. But I think if you're the leader, the owner, the, whatever that's in charge of all of this, it's very much that servant leadership model. Make sure you're providing everything you got. If you're on the receiving end of that process and you're expected to do it, make sure you're communicating why there are steps that are not working for you.
Yes.
Right. So it's got to be kind of a two-way street there. And, it should be a living, breathing process.
I would argue, and we do argue, that the downstream process should define what complete and accurate looks like.
Right.
For the upstream. Yeah. And so you're
serving that internal customer.
Value stream mapping has evolved at Hennig to be called something we call a process success map. And so we laser cut something, it goes to the press brake for bending, then it goes to the welder. Well, the welder tells the bender, this is what complete and accurate looks like. Here's how you can be kind to me. I want to receive it like this. When I get it like this, I can be successful. And so on. And so give flowers to Noah for a second. My older brother, I've seen us evolve so much, and he went all the way to shipping and said, okay, we're going to start there. What does success look like for you? When you get something that just flows perfectly, what does it look like? Backs all the way up through, and each step defined it for the upstream process. That becomes our map. That becomes our standards. But then within that process, you get the opportunity to like add steps that you feel are really necessary or beneficial or helpful. So like Paul, you said kitting.
Mm-hmm.
Like kitting completely changed Hennig. We
Right.
weren't kitting things. Like it was like, as you can imagine, a lot of this is like fabrication work. So you have all these puzzle pieces in a box. And like all you have is the picture on the front of the box of putting the puzzle together. Like that's fun because puzzles aren't like if it was step-by-step instructions, it'd be pretty boring to make a puzzle.
Right.
But like you don't want puzzles at work.
Sure.
So now we have these like Christmas tree shaped racks with the exact shadow of that part. And you know, if you got to make 10 of them, then that cart has 10 full assemblies, like bill of materials, if you will, right there. And they could just pull from the cart, make 10 of the thing. They know if the parts are there. They know if they're missing something. So I've seen just having a list and having a process create steps that really facilitated continuous improvement and a better process 10 years down the road, you know, things that we've still done. But without starting with that list and then eventually a process, it's hard to like find those nuggets, those like Kaizen nuggets for continuous improvement.
Well, and that, you know, that downstream is so important. We spent a lot of time internally talking about who's your customer, right? So if most of the parts we run get 1 to 2 lathe ops, then go to the mills for 1 to 3 or 4, you know, so the lathe operator, their customer is the mill operator, right? And I mean, just through that entire value chain of, and, you know, all the way to shipping, right? And actually I even go all the way to, I would tell you to go all the way to invoicing.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
What does your accounting department need to create a good invoice? Well, they need a packing slip, right? Like, and a PO. So from there, what does a shipping need to create a good packing slip? They need a final inspected past part. What do they need? What, you know, all the way back through the process, and just develop your process that way and find all those little holes that get created along the way. And there's a lot of them.
It's not
a
Mike's
lot of opportunities
process
for failure.
It's not Mike's process. It's not Paul's process. Nick, Noah, whoever's like leading the company. It's not our process. It's the whole company's process. And if you include them as part of it, like, hey, we all have to own this process. Maybe different people will focus on different parts of it, but now it just becomes something we all share that we're all like cultivating together.
Yeah, I love that point of getting people involved and helping define it, because then they have ownership and they're bought into making it right and improving it in the future, as opposed to this is, you know, someone dumping it on them. This is what you have to do.
How often have we heard that disgruntled employee like, oh, I mean, this is never going to work. I could have told you that it would never work this way. It's like, you're probably right. Let's make sure that you own part of it too.
Yeah.
Well, and then part of the question back to that employee too is, well, why didn't you tell us it wasn't going to work? Right. I mean, again, it goes back to that internal communication of everybody needs to be providing input.
So before we get into the actual, because I do want to dig a little deeper into kitting and the actual shop floor, you know, what does that actually look like? Part of that detailed plan is scheduling, right? And the time elements that happen with each step. And I alluded to it earlier, but I think it's worth spending a few more minutes just really digging in. So when I talk to shop owners, kind of the 2 biggest challenges they have today probably are finding enough people and their schedule, right? Scheduling is like constantly the problem, right? Just throwing too many resources at it to try to get on time, or just they're not able to be on time, and their actual deliveries suffer, and then their customers are not happy with them. So, and I've always said that, you know, software can be an important part of having a good schedule, but scheduling software is not a cure-all for being on time 99% of the time. And the thing that really makes the difference in making being on time not just a crazy challenge every day is making sure that you have all the correct inputs to understand all this sort of sub-dates, sub-requirements for when things need to be done. So I'll just list out a few things. Of course, the first would be understanding how long it's going to take for all the things to come together before that first manufacturing operation can start, right? So you know how long it's going to take you to get your material here. You know how long any special cutters or any fixtures or work holding or bomb items or anything that you need before you can start. You got to understand those so you can then kick those off, you know, early enough. And we talked about parallel processing early on, which just helps facilitate that. But it is important to understand those time elements, because sometimes you have a really long lead time material. There's just no getting around it. And you should just make sure you're not scheduling your job to start before that long lead time material arrives, or else you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're going to go to do your setup and you realize you don't have your material, right? And that not having that visibility is certainly a problem. So that's really important. The amount of time it's going to take in every work center is also critically important, right? Is it going to sit on this machine for 2 hours, or is it going to sit on the machine for 2 days or 2 weeks, right? And that's, again, comprised of setup time and run time, inspection time, whatever the time elements are. So making sure those are understood. Sometimes there is just queue time in a work center. You finish your part, you hand it into quality. Quality always has a half-day lead time to even turn around and get your first article back, or at final inspection when it comes back from outside processing. It's just going to take 2 days. It just always does, right? So, and you can work on those separately, right? Do those Kaizen improvements to make sure you're shortening your lead time and not having the Herbie problem. But for what it is, I think understanding the queue time is really important, because if you're only scheduling based on the time it takes to do the actual part number, you're setting yourself up for failure. And then, of course, if your job has outside processing, that is going to take X amount of time, right? Depending on the process, depending on your vendor, depending on how far away they are. It's going to take time to get there, for them to process it, get it back to you, and then to go through, inspection, make sure it's good before it can continue through the rest of the company. So understanding that that total elapsed time is also really important.
Paul, do you have any guidance there? I'm just curious. Tell me if my numbers are crazy or if I shouldn't be going this basic. So we plan on, on our schedule, we plan on about 85% efficiency. So we don't assume we're going to get 8 hours out of an 8-hour day, right?
Right.
Of productive time.
Yep.
So 85%. Yep. We generally, most of our outside processing is local to us. So for every outside process, we just add a week to the lead time. Some of it's 2 days, some of it's 5, but in general, at least in the estimating lead time part, we just estimate it out to be about a week per outside process. Is that good practice, or should I really dial that in tighter?
I think it really comes down to what your customers need. If you have 3 outside processes and you add 3 weeks lead time and your customer needs it in 2, you're not going to win that job.
Right.
But if lead time if that's not the limiting factor in you winning the job, then it's certainly safer to be a little more conservative, for sure.
Yeah, the more outside processes we tack on, the more likely I am to add time, right? If it's
because you don't control those.
Yeah, because I don't have control of that lead time. Well, in a lot of cases, the only way I have control is that my outside processor's biggest customer is also the customer that I'm sending those parts through, and sometimes they have to call them and say, "Hey, put Mike's parts in front of my parts because I need those first." But yeah, I get really nervous on the outside processing because it's, we actually had an incident last week where we were supposed to have some parts back on Thursday. These are super hot parts for a very important.
Did they have a hot sticker on them?
Not anymore.
Three hot stickers.
Did, yes. Susan put it hot on the email too.
But the customer checked in, they were supposed to be back from grind on Thursday, I think it was, and we let the customer know on Friday that we had heard from the outside processor and we weren't going to have them back till today. And they said, well, do they understand how urgent these are? I mean, they're the ones that are behind schedule. Are they working this weekend? Okay, well, that's the way I think too, right? So if I told you I was going to be having back to you on Thursday and now I'm telling you Tuesday, I'm going to be throwing everything at it I can to make sure that you're going to have them on Thursday. But and my only response I could give to that customer is look, I need to find a new vendor. But in this instance, there's nothing I can do about that. And we're recording the Tuesday after Memorial Day, right? There's no way that vendor is going to respond to me and say, oh yeah, I'll bring in my crew over Memorial Day weekend to get your parts done. They just weren't going to.
And you heard from your vendor on Friday?
Yeah, we called to check on. Yeah, they didn't show up Thursday.
Okay.
So I think we had contacted them Thursday, hey, what's going on? And then they let us know Friday it's going to be Tuesday.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So
I might suggest.
And then we had to let the customer know, and then that's when that exchange.
Sure. I mean, I might suggest the better practice is to call your vendor proactively on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Well, and we
say,
had been.
Okay.
We've been
good.
these were.
And they were saying, yeah, we're good.
Oh,
and all of a sudden they
everything's great. Yeah. And then now all of a sudden it's not, right? So anyway,
Mike, I got the most out of the box idea. Like, just buy that company.
Well,
that's what you do, right?
a large part of my acquisition strategy is to
vertically integrate and have more control.
So I can control my price, quality, and lead time.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can't do that this weekend.
Got to make a really nice offer,
right? I'm just curious, like if that 85% number is good. If you had any insight into, how to really build that buffer into your schedule.
Sure. I think that's a pretty decent, factor to use. And, we have that built right into Pro Shop for every work center. Mm-hmm. But I'd say the more lean you are, the better you start getting rid of these wastes, the higher you can make that number, right? Mm-hmm. You can make it 95% eventually.
Right.
But yeah, I can't remember. I think I can trying to remember what the default setting is, but it's probably 85%, something like that.
As we're talking about this, I'm thinking back to the prior episode on quoting and estimating, and you really can't be good at that unless you're good at this. Like, if you don't have any idea, like these times or these buffers or like how you manage orders, then you're going to suck at quoting and estimating too. So like, if you listen to that last episode and got excited about like doing the things we said, you really need to listen to this episode and start here.
Yeah, it's definitely all one big full circle thing that feeds on itself.
Well, and I think it also reiterates why in our tech stack, we talk about just go ahead and start with an ERP system, right? Because a lot of the things we're talking about will be built into your quoting process, to your, receiving an order process, doing a PO confirmation. A lot of this that we're talking about will just be built in to what you're doing.
Because if you're doing it all in spreadsheets, to your point you just made a minute ago, you're taking all your times you quoted in Excel and adding this 85% efficiency multiplier to it to get the real time you think it might actually take while it's sitting on the machine or throughout the shop. And that's just complicated formulas. And then you change the formula once and you don't realize it, and then it's wrong, and then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. And what if just throw in the mix there of, what if you've got one guy running two machines? I mean, your per machine efficiency is going to drop. Your overall efficiency will be higher, but now your schedule is going to extend out another day on both those machines you're running. I mean, it's
potentially, it depends. And this comes back to
if you have the right job scheduled and
exactly the percentage of labor, the tack time, how much manual versus automated time you have. I'm sure Nick has a something they put in place to do it's called. What's the name of that actual form? It's called standard work combination sheet. I don't know if you guys use those terms, but we used to do that at Pro CNC.
Taking stuff that and then like making our own word for it. So we probably do have it. Like a process success map is something only we say, but it's basically like a really good value stream map.
Yeah, for us, standard work combination sheet was you basically sit there with a stopwatch, and this works, of course, best for production, not just a one-off prototype job. But like someone, when you hit cycle start, you start the timer, right? And then what is the machine doing, and what is the person doing, right? And how long is that elapsed time, and how much of it can be done at the same time as the automated time? How much is the machine waiting for the person? So the more automation you have, maybe this is a good topic for a lights out episode. The more you free up those operators to be flexible with their time of when they can go run that other machine, or when they can do kitting for the next job that's coming up next, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I don't know if it's totally synonymous with what did you call that?
A standard work combination sheet.
Yeah, what we have a metric called MCT time, like manufacturing critical path time. It's part of QRM, like quick response manufacturing, comes out of University of Wisconsin, and Noah's like really into that. We really try to use as many elements of that as possible. And I think we probably should dive deeper when we do like running a lean enterprise, because it spans across every aspect of your business. But figuring out like we call like white space and gray space, like when you're actually adding value to it, what can be ran in parallel, when things are waiting in queue, how to reduce the queue time. It's all that stuff, and
For sure.
gosh, it's so important to think that way and evolve and get to the point where you're doing more advanced techniques in like kind of the whole process.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because Mike, going back to your point about like, if your people are saying they don't have time to do the process, part of it might be you need to fix your process, but part of it might be that they're causing their own firefighting because they're not doing it. And so therefore they
100%.
believe they don't have time to do it. And it's this catch-22. And the same thing is true with all the lean stuff you're talking about, Nick. Like if you haven't freed up time, it just in your week, in your day, in your mental bandwidth, because you've proactively put out the fires that are not going to start because you have a good process, you're never going to have time to do lean if you are just fighting fires every day.
Yeah, 100%. We talk about this internally quite a bit, where it's, and it could just be, we bring in a new piece of equipment, whatever it might be. I mean, we have to invest that time in ourselves. Think about, we're in an MBA series here, right? So think about if you take, a college class on anything, I don't know, accounting, right? And, how much classroom time do you spend learning about accounting, right? So it's maybe a couple hours a week for 4 months, something like that, right? So you've got, what would that be? 24 to 30 hours, maybe something like that you've spent. And now you understand that subject. Sometimes this stuff, it's going to take, like, I need to spend 20 hours learning this process. And you could do that over the course of a couple of weeks. You could do that over the course of a half of a week. Kind of depends on how you need to do that. But you're now going to be really good at that, right? Like, I mean, people don't do that. I mean, like, we get out of school or whatever, and we quit investing that time in like really detailed learning into a subject. And, I think if we would on any one of these little things, so whether it's a specific process or even something within the process, well, now you have that MBA in that process, right?
And you have to go from that classroom time to like the field study,
Practical
if you will, and like
time and
actually
homework
do the thing, because that's when it comes to life. I remember when I was in school, before I was applying it to my career, it was just like theoretical crap, and I would just like learn enough to pass tests.
Sure.
And then like when I was actually applying everything I was learning into my career, it's like I'll never forget that stuff because I was using it. So, if you go to a lean seminar, they're all over the country. They're everywhere. They're great. Then like go put something into practice. If you listen to this podcast, Machine Shop MBA series, like go put that into practice and it will come to life. And like that's where all the value will be found, because people learn by doing.
Yeah. So if you'll take that, 10 hours, 20 hours, it might take you time to learn that. And that's okay. But how much time is that going to save you over the next weeks, months, years of now not fighting that lack of knowledge of how to do something every day for the rest of your career?
Yeah.
Like
you think about like the, that buffer time, or, everyone is wrong to think I want 100% spindle utilization, right? Like, cause you need some of that fat to like sustain life. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to have some freedom to think beyond just the next part. So it's actually good to like kind of plan for some of that buffer. And I think, if the buffer's too high, you can reduce that, but you have to, we have weekends for a reason. Even God rested on the seventh day. I mean, like, let's go. So make sure you're intentionally creating that space in your culture to do continuous improvement. My brother always says, like, continuous improvement needs continuous improvement.
Yeah, for sure. So, we it's funny you say that, because on our user pages for every employee, you can set targets for how much time they're expected to be doing certain tasks, right? And like a typical, what we call time against work orders might be 80 or 90%, depending on the role of the person, right? But there's a line item for Kaizen. Like Kelsey built that in years and years ago. It's like you should be spending 5% or 3% of every single week doing Kaizen, continuous improvement activities.
Love that.
If you're not doing that and time tracking against that so we can see it, I spent 3 hours last week doing Kaizen improvement activities. then you're not hitting the bar. Like
That's
you need
so
to
good.
set that as an expectation.
And that's something like only someone who like ran a machine shop and then built software would think about, I think.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's
kudos to Kelsey for thinking of that. That's great.
He was all in on the lean stuff. It was awesome. So I'd love to wrap up by talking about specifically what kitting looks like for a machine shop, and then we'll be ready to do part 2 where we're actually on the actually cutting chips.
Yeah,
and
cool.
So I'll just kind of visualize what it looked like at our shop. So we used, most of the parts we made were not massively huge, so they were like the raw material would fit on a cart, and like we had those Rubbermaid heavy duty carts or whatnot, and we had an area where there was just like some rows with tape lines on the floor. It's like, this is the queue for this machine, this is the queue for this machine. And a pre-processed cart, that we would call it, they had a tool caddy with any custom tools that were not already in the machine, where they were in their holders, they were touched off, they were the right extension length, they were numbered, so exactly which pockets they were going to go in. We had any fixturing that was needed or work holding that, again, was not already dedicated in the machine, was there on the cart. And it had been pulled from the fixture storage area because it had a fixture number, so you know exactly where to go find it. It was sitting on the cart. Any special measuring instruments that were needed that were non-standard, that weren't in like the measurement toolkit at the machine already, those were pre-processed and sitting on the cart. You either had your raw material that we either buy pre-cut from the vendor, and it was sitting, maybe it was cut plate, it was sitting on the cart as well, or right nearby if it was too heavy to fit on the cart. Or in our cases, if you had we would often do this, what we call bar to box process, where we'd actually cut each piece of material as it goes in the machine. So we never have whip of a bunch of cut parts that could be accidentally too short or too long. That was also just basically right there, ready to go. We even pre-process the packaging materials. So if we were doing 100 parts and we could fit 20 in a box, we had 5 boxes. They were flat, and we hadn't built them up yet. But they were flat with 100 bubble bags on that cart, completely ready to go. So literally there was nothing, when you pulled that cart over to the machine, there was nothing that you needed to leave that work center before you have your first good part in hand. If you had to leave, then something wasn't processed well enough in advance, right? Because if you leave, your setup's going to be longer, you're going to get distracted, your machine's going to be sitting, you're going to get out of the zone, whatever. It just kind of exacerbates itself. So
that's pretty remarkable.
We had this idea that if you, and this is how, speaking to that thing you mentioned earlier, Nick, that's 50% setup reduction sheet that we have with ProShop, like, they're actually not about the software. It's just about best practices in making sure you can be efficient with your setups. And by prepping all these things, you have the very best chance of walking up to the machine and getting your first part off within the estimated budget time as possible, and have it be a good part.
Yeah.
So anyway,
we used to have this huge banner in our shop that had camouflage on it, and it said "No hunting."
Oh, I love it.
So like, you're not allowed to go hunting around for your tools and stuff. Like, make sure you have it kitted up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I do like that. You've mentioned
that
that
would not
before.
work. That
I
would
need
not
to steal
work
that.
at Hill, where everyone's a hunter.
No, but it's such a great point. I need to steal that.
You hunt on the weekends. You don't hunt during the weekdays.
Yeah, I need to steal that. You've talked about it before. I like that.
Yeah, it's good. My dad thought it was so like dad joke funny, and so anyway, I was just like,
well, I've heard of shop owners who, they keep hearing that things, or they keep seeing that things are taking too long, and then they finally just like go out on the shop floor themselves to like be a part of it and experience it. And then they're like, what the hell is everybody doing? They're just walking around all day looking for shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow. Like, we need to put in a process so they don't need to go hunting for everything all day long. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, that's what I think, at least for me, that was our gold standard. If we could hit that every time, we were setting ourselves up for success, for successful production. So
100%.
Well, I'm excited to get into the next episode where we're going to talk about actually making some chips finally, but I have to leave you with the joke. Who's the funniest person in the machine shop?
I don't know.
The setup guy. You want to know why?
What's that?
He spends a lot of his time kidding.
Oh.
Yes.
You laughed harder
Nick.
than we did, but
Wow.
that's a good one.
That was for me, friends.
That was good.
That was good.
All right, let's get the hell out of this episode.
Kidding aside, yeah.
Yeah, kidding aside. Hey, if you don't have a way to manage your orders, you're not making chips.
And if you're not making chips,
You're not making money.
bam.